This is a key to the worksheet on topic 5, part C, worksheet 1. And in this worksheet, you want to solve each of these quadratic equations by completing the square. So you must use completing the square. Now, one of the resources that was provided for you in Canvas is this handout on completing the square. Okay, so step 1 says this: you need to rearrange or divide as needed. Now, keep in mind that both of these examples here, the coefficient of x squared is 1. So you see 1x squared, 1x squared. If it was something other than 1, like 2x squared, then that's where you would do the second bullet to divide both sides of the equation by the coefficient of the x squared term. But we don't have that here, so it'll just be the first bullet we're going to look at. So it says this: rearrange the equation, placing a constant term to the right side of the equal sign, and the variable terms to the left. So in this particular case, you see the constant is on the left side. So let's go ahead and bring it to the other side. And also it says this: leave blanks on each side of the equal signs, because at some point you're going to add something to both sides. So here's what you're going to have. We have x squared plus 2x, leave a blank, equals 73. All right, so that was the first step. So according to step one, we had to rearrange our equation. We had to rearrange the terms. Okay, now step 2. So step 2 is where we take half and we're going to square and then we're going to add. Okay, so here's the first bullet. Take half or divide by 2 the coefficient of x. All right, so the coefficient of x here is a positive 2. So let's go off right here and do this. I'm going to put it right here. So the coefficient of x is 2. It says take half of that, or taking half means the same thing as dividing by 2. So if I divide by 2, I get 2 divided by 2 is 1. Okay? Then it says this: then you square the result. All right, so I'm going to take 1 and I'm going to square it, and when I square it, I get 1. All right? So I took half of the coefficient of x, I squared it, now I'm going to add to both sides. So the next bullet says add the number to both sides of the equation. So in other words, we're going to say plus 1, plus 1. Okay? And then step 3 says to factor the left side and simplify the right. So in other words, what you now have is this. So you now have something that's called a perfect square trinomial. A perfect square trinomial. And remember, a perfect square trinomial, go ahead and enlarge this a little bit bigger. So a perfect square trinomial, which is what this is now, is a trinomial in which when you factor it, you get a binomial times itself. All right, so if I factor x squared plus 2x plus 1, I get x plus 1 times itself. So if I multiply this out, I'll get this back. And then we're going to simplify the right side. 73 plus 1 is 74. Okay? All right, so that was step 2. Step 3 is to solve. Now remember, you're going to solve this using the square root property. All right, so you're going to take the square root of both sides to solve for x. Now remember to use both the positive and the negative, that plus or minus symbol. All right? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this over. X plus 1 squared equals 74. Take the square root of both sides, plus or minus. And so the square and the square root undo each other. So you get x plus 1 equal, and then plus or minus the square root is 74. Now 74, the only perfect square that goes into 74 is 1. So I cannot simplify this. And so all you do, since this is an irrational number, all you do is just bring the 1 over. So I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides, just like this. And so I get x equal, see this is 0 here, negative 1 plus or minus, negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 74. And so there's your answer. But remember, in my math lab, when you do this in my math lab, you have to say, and just remind you, in my math lab, you're going to say negative 1 plus the square root of 74, comma, negative 1 minus the square root of 74. So they're going to probably tell you to separate this using commas. Okay, now let's look at number 2. So the same thing in number 2. So we got to bring the 14 over. So step 1, so I get x squared minus 6x, leave a space, equal a negative 14, right? Negative 14. So you're going to subtract 14 from both sides. Okay, now, so step 2, remember, is where you take half, you square, and then you add. So if I take half the coefficient of x, which is -6, go put that here. Take half of that. -6 divided by 2 is -3. So I took half. Now remember, the next thing is to square that -3. So -3 squared becomes a +9. And then we're going to add +9 to both sides, just like this. And now remember, the next part is to factor the left-hand side, to factor this trinomial. So this is now a perfect square trinomial. So last semester you learned that a perfect square trinomial is a trinomial that when you factor it, it's a binomial times itself. So when I factor x squared minus 6x plus 9, I get x minus 3 times x minus 3. And then that's going to equal -14 plus 9 is a -5. And so now if I rewrite this over, and then take the square root of both sides, plus or minus, I get, remember these undo each other, the square and the square root undo each other, so I get x minus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of -5. Now remember though, you know how to simplify the square root of -5. The square root of -5 is the square root of -1 times the square root of 5. The only perfect square that goes into 5 is 1, so I cannot simplify the square root of 5, but I do know that the square root of -1 is I, so this becomes I square root of 5. And so I'm going to put that here. So I get x minus 3 equals plus or minus I square root of 5. And then adding 3 to both sides. Now notice my solutions here are going to be complex imaginary solutions. So when I combine like terms, this is 0. So I get x equal +3 plus or minus I square root of 5. And there's your answer, your solutions, your two solutions. So if you want to separate those two solutions, write them individually, you would say 3 plus I square root of 5, comma, 3 minus I square root of 5. Okay? All right, so that is the key to the worksheet dealing with topic 5, part C.